Hello everybody, how are you today? Welcome to the Avinor conference. My name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dag Falk-Petersen. I'm the CEO of Avinor. And for those who know me, I still am Dag Falk-Petersen and the CEO of Avinor. Turbulent times. It's a good name, isn't it? This year's conference, more than 160 people are attending. That's very good. In this very demanding scene we have, and a lot of things to be done, so many people is still coming here to this conference. I'm really thankful for that. And it's for us a record-breaking audience we have today. I'm pleased to welcome you here to the Park-In, next to our main airport, Oslo Airport Gardermoen. Last year we took 21 million passengers through this terminal. And as you can see, we are building for years to come, and in 2017 we'll open a new part of this airport, enabling us to handle 28 million passengers. We are preparing ourselves for the future. What we see in Norway is a continuous growth. For last year has been really a massive growth, and we are struggling to handle all the capacity that we see around, and especially here at Oslo, in Bergen, Stavanger, and Trondheim. But we know this will not continue forever. We are seeing changes. And this brings me to the theme for today, turbulent times. For those of you who have read the papers, the Norwegian papers, Avinor, our company, has been in the headlines for the last days. And it's not very good headlines for us, I must say. So we do see the turbulent times inside our company. Long before the financial crisis hit Europe and the world at large in full force in 2008, the aviation industry, and in particular airlines, had to deal with economy reality that called for rationalization, restructuring, mergers, and of course, in some cases, bankruptcy. We have also seen that in Norway. Europe and the US, as you saw on the film initially here, are no longer the growth center for the global economy. Today, Asia are experiencing strong growth while it's slowing down here. At the same time, there is indication that much of Europe is facing several years of tough restructuring, high employment, and low growth. Here in Norway, thanks to Norway's supply of natural resources, oil and gas, fishery, and a lot of waterfalls that we are putting in pipelines, many Norwegians view what's happening as a different story. We actually do not take it in ourselves in the everyday life, that this is not what's happening down in Europe. We look at Europe as a Greek tragedy. However, all of us here and all of us that work in aviation know that this industry is facing a different story, different situation. We are international and very cyclic, and we are well aware of the realities. As the owner of Avinor is the owner of 46 airports. Did you know that? I know that. And we are also a NSP, Air Navigation Service Provider. We know our customers, the airlines, the ground handling companies. They are struggling every day, every night, in fierce competition with each other. Almost weekly, we have reports of airlines grounding the aircraft and laying off employees. As the owner in Norway of the Norwegian air infrastructure, we share the airline destiny. If they fail, we do the same. If one airline goes bankrupt or reduce their traffic, so do we. I hope that and believe that this conference will provide a valuable contribution to the debate on how we can successfully develop financially sustainable aviation. History has shown that it's often in time of turbulence and crisis that both society and individuals prove to be most adaptable. And it's in these times innovation and new ideas have the best conditions for growth. Our industry has already started, in cooperation with political authorities in Europe, a work to redesign airspace regime. It will provide us with higher capacity, fewer delays, better safety, and all this to a lower cost. Also, European airport owners have started reviewing work practices and a new certification program, which also will make a quite different operation of how we operate airports. Increased use of tenders and fewer monopolies. I actually don't like that. We are more or less a monopoly here in Norway, but we have to face reality as well. But that is the way EU goes. It will make aviation look different in the years to come, also for us. Our industry is dependent on constructive and fruitful cooperation with our political authorities. And I therefore very much look forward to hearing what our Minister of Transport and Communication tomorrow has to tell us, what her view is on aviation and what will happen as she sees it. We are also fortunate that we have with us a very competent group of speakers today, both from Norway and international. I expect that we will have an interesting discussion, a fruitful discussion, on the issues that the conference aims to shed light on. A social program, not least. We have a very good social program, get ready for that, is arranged this evening. And I very much look forward to meet you guys in a more informal discussion scene. I urge you all to make new contacts, discuss with new people how we can improve aviation for the future. I very much would like to thank our sponsors. They are present in here and also outside the doors. Take a good look at what they have to offer. I appreciate the support you give us. So I hereby declare the Avinor Conference 2012 for open, and I would like to give the word to our moderator for this conference, Mr. Knut Skaar, a well-known senior, what do I call you? Senior. Knut has been in this industry for so many years and did an excellent job. Together with Knut, we have a co-moderator, Marianne Hornes and Andrew Charlton. Thank you for your attention, and please, Knut. Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this for about a year. I have been looking forward to this for about a year, and hopefully the same with you. I saw a lot of you last year, and I see some new faces this year. I don't know if you saw Barack Obama's speech this morning, where he said that he was even more optimistic about the future than before. And I think with the theme of turbulent times, we need to be optimistic. At least I am optimistic about this conference when I see this bright and hopefully very active audience. We have people out there, Øystein and Olav, ready with their microphones for questions and comments after we heard the speakers. And I have two co-moderators with me. please come to the scene. I will shortly introduce them, but first I need to give you some practical information. You will have ample of time in the coffee breaks, and during the coffee breaks, Select Service Partner will serve tastings all the time. But there will be lunch and dinner, so please don't have too much. Lunch will be today between 1 and 2:30, and we will be in this room until 5:45. That is the plan. And you should be here until 5:45, because what you see on the program, it says jazz code the last 3 quarters, and I'm telling you, don't miss that. It's not only about music, it's about team building, and you can learn something from that. There will be after that, there will be outside here, there will be a reception with drinks and more food, and then there will be new drinks at 8 o'clock, and you don't have to remember that, because we will send you all an SMS about that. So we're sure you will be there, and there will be dinner at 8:15, and not only a dinner. For those who were here last year, it will be a dinner show, maybe more show than a dinner. We'll see. And we will also, there will be webcast from this conference. So when I look to our viewers on the internet, please tell us about the sound and the picture, and about the content as well. We'll tell the audience here how many viewers we have after a while. But now, please, my co-moderators. First, we have Mariann Hornes, Technical Director of Oslo Airport. And before she came to Oslo Airport, she was, I have to look here, she's done so many things. She was Business Development and Marketing Director at Ericsson Radar. She was a part of the team as an IT director when they built a new university hospital here in Oslo. And she was also IT director for Norsk Tipping, which is the state-owned national betting company. You will hear more from Mariann later. And then you remember, some of you remember from last year, Andrew Charlton.
Good morning, good morning.
The Geneva-based Australian who's an expert in government affairs.
I hope so.
And also widely known as a moderator, and also the editor of the newsletter Aviation Intelligence Reporter.
Correct.
Yes.
Good eye.
So now, Andrew.
Indeed.
I leave the scene to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good luck.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Last year, you had the misfortune of having to listen to me for 45 minutes. This year, you're going to have the misfortune of listening to me for 45 minutes as well, but I'm going to split it up into little bits. It'll be 45 minutes spread out across the course of a day and a half, which I hope is slightly less painful. But it is actually my pleasure and my privilege now to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Per Arne Watle. My principal job here today, by the way, is to mispronounce as many Norwegian names as possible. And I can put you in contact with a man who's running a book about how many and by how much I'm going to mispronounce all of those names. But in fact, the keynote speech won't have any mispronounced Norwegian names because it's being delivered by a Norwegian, or at least I hope it doesn't have any mispronounced Norwegian names. Per Arne is, as we speak, the chair of one of the most important of the bodies in the Single European Sky edifice, the construct of developing a single air traffic control system or a seamless air traffic control system across a really complicated airspace. The ICB, the Industry Consultation Body, is the place where industry and various other actors come together and act as a consulting and advisory body to the regulators, I guess, for want of a better word, to the politicians and the regulators who are in charge of putting the rules together. Before that, Per Arne was in fact the chief executive of Norway's domestic airline, or one of Norway's domestic airlines. Norway, of course, a country with considerable requirement for domestic aviation, a topic very close to my heart, of course. And prior to that, he worked as a political advisor for various for various governments. But before all of that, again, he was a school teacher. So if ever anybody's career trajectory has moved from local to national to international, it's that trajectory, a fascinating trajectory. And be quiet up the back, please. Right? Remember, you are in the presence of a school teacher, so I hope you've done your homework as well, something else very important. But none of that is relevant to what he's about to say to us, but I do welcome Per Arne to the stage. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. The title of this conference is Turbulent Times, but it hasn't always been like that. During the 20th century, there was growth and stability in civil aviation. Aircraft performance improved, and so did ground facilities and navigation systems. The airline business became a global one, bringing people all over the world closer to each other. Civil aviation meant progress. Air transport became a significant factor in people's everyday life. Some would add that it has been a key factor in keeping the world at peace. Up to the 1980s, markets were subject to strict government control. Prices and route networks were regulated in accordance with airline preferences. And I must say, more often than not, at the cost of passengers' interests. Deregulation put an end to the old world of predictability. Instead of nursing the right political contacts, airlines had to concentrate on passenger relations. Airlines developed their hub-and-spoke systems, and we got new kinds of carriers. The changes so far had one thing in common. They emerged from political initiated processes, driven by the desire to put the consumer in a more dominant position. The 11th of September 2001 changed this picture. A radical transformation of air transport has taken place in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks in the United States. And much of this differs from what we have seen earlier. The mainspring of the transformation has been crisis. This does not mean that we have been lacking important political decisions in air transport since 9/11. Point is that these decisions, at a large degree, have been reactive, common as direct responses to different kinds of threats. The need to repair damages has been a more dominant motive than making and realizing new strategies. And the success of the repair approach is doubtful. Air traffic has lost terrain to other kinds of transport. There are even strong indications that some of the political decisions rather have enlarged crises than solving them. One fresh example of this was the volcano crisis in spring 2010, where we experienced extension of the fear-generated approach through risk amplification to drive more regulation. The disruption of the Icelandic volcano clearly showed how vulnerable modern society is to a breakdown in air traffic. Furthermore, the unexpected situation added extra pressures to an already troubled European air transport industry. During the first part of the crisis, the lack of sufficient data and processes at the national and international level led to hasty decisions that enlarged instead of mitigating the problem. The lack of overview was not helped by the fragmented decision-making process by which local airspace closures were decided upon in the early stages of the eruption. There is a Russian-born strategy professor. There was a strategy professor called Igor Ansov, and he invented the saying paralysis by analysis. And in fact, here we got a paralysis by analysis approach, requiring more data to be absolutely sure there was no hazard. At the same time, aircraft in other parts of the world were happily flying past volcanoes. As the Commission came on stage, the crisis were more effectively dealt with. But what about its long-term aspects? What lessons were actually learned? We could hope that the disruption may have accelerated the integration of the national air traffic control systems. We got the immediate creation of a crisis coordination group to handle future transport disruptions and the communication of a lot of promising intentions. But any intention is of limited value if not followed up by an adequate set of actions. In spite of the Commission's verbal recognition of the vast industry losses, there was no practical fair initiatives to compensate airlines, ANSPs, and the airport for the losses. In my view, the response was inadequate. No aircraft had reported any problems during this period, and the only one aircraft has ever suffered a total engine failure, a Boeing 747, and they had to fly through the plume of being emitted from a volcano. So despite clear skies, regulators kept aircraft on the ground for insufficient reasons. The crisis revealed several weaknesses, not so much related to the volcanic situation as to more structural governing problems. One could interpret the crisis as a reminder of actions needed to be done in order to make the European air transport more sustainable. One quality criteria of the European Union's crisis management was whether their handling improved instead of weakened the probability of reaching the single European sky goals. And in my view, there is no convincing evidence that proves the first alternative to be the most valid one. Air transport has been facing different kinds of crises during the last decade. The most severe of them have been a safety crisis, a traffic drop crisis, a capacity crisis, and an economic crisis. And all of these add up to regulatory crises of either over or under regulation. All of them have been man-made. Even if all of these have been severe, we have been facing a far more fundamental crisis, namely the air transport decision-making crisis. Let me first say some words about the safety crisis and my perception of it. I underline, this is all the time my personal perception of these things. One dramatic consequence of September 11 was people's perception of uncertainty and fear. And in order to maintain passengers' confidence to air traffic as a safe way of traveling, a lot of resources have been invested to develop security controls. In that respect, air travel has become far more complicated for the passenger than it used to be. The new security regime has put severe time constraints on the traveler. These constraints are the price people are more than willing to pay for a safe flight, given the fact that they are really effective. But how cost-effective has the new security rules really been? I once discussed this with a security manager, stating, look at all the expenses the new security rules have exposed us to, and imagine that we could play the match all over again. Would you then have spent all this money the same way? No comments, was his answer. Obviously, I hit a point that was relevant. The fact that safety always will be priority number one in air transport should, in my view, encourage us to, and not preventing us from, optimize the use of resources in this sector. There is, however, a tendency to avoid the real problems. By accepting the uncritical belief in the effectiveness of security controls, we are running the risk of ignoring other important safety aspects. It is, for instance, not less important to check what kind of people we let on board than controlling in detail what each of them is carrying. Detection of intent is far more important than detection of means. All public staff should be briefed to perform low key passenger profiling as a part of their ordinary duties, and the means to communicate concerns regarding individual personnel quickly and easily should be established. Technically, it's not complicated to check personal identity against personal profile. Politically, it has been more controversial. To safeguard personal information in general has been regarded more important than preventing people with the potential for violent behavior admittance. In my view, it is a basic misunderstanding that the air should be open for everybody. I admit that the process of passenger selection confronts us with several conflicting interests. It's not easy to make rules that offer 100% justice to everybody. Safety selection of passengers affects basic society values. But I would rather take that discussion than hiding behind a safety illusion. Now everyone is a suspect, so the terrorist in fact wins. One other safety problem is the lack of balance between the amount of security checks in air transport and the rest of society, including other means of transport. Every concentration of people represents a terrorist potential. The more people that are collected, the more exposed the assembly is as a terrorist target. So where are the logics in all this? Why do we not have security checks at concert halls? I experienced that once in Russia. And sports arenas, or at railway stations and ship terminals. I admit that ships and trains are easier to decamp from, but that alone does not justify this imbalance. So to sum up my conclusion concerning the safety aspect, neither society nor air transport can offer 100% safety. But if we consider it important to give citizens the confidence that they can walk in the streets after darkness, and be confident that our children are not being offered drugs at school, we have to accept that such a priority has a cost. This cost implies wider police authorities. This implies trust. Trust to our democratic values and those who execute the laws. Of course, in order to avoid that this trust is misused, we need check and balances. Now, let me turn to the traffic drop crisis. As we know, the time after September 11 became a downturn for airlines all over the world. The terrorist attacks were followed by a dramatic drop in the demand for air travel. The situation never fell back to normalcy. Consequences were severe for the whole air transport community. Airline losses were enormous and had to be dealt with the hard way. More than 400,000 airline jobs disappeared during the first 3 years after September 11. The terrorist threat may have triggered this decline, but that is only part of the explanation. The root of the crisis stems from a structural market imbalance developed over years. The big losses and the downsizing may be considered as an expression of an accumulated overcapacity among the traditional airlines. Not all the airlines have experienced the period after September 11 as a crisis. The deregulation opened up the sky for a new kind of airlines in terms of the low-cost carriers. Until the last part of the preceding century, they held modest shares of the market. This has changed dramatically during the last 10 to 15 years. In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks, low-cost airlines have managed to make money and grow at a time when traditional carriers have been struggling to survive. But they have been far more than conquerors of new markets. They have been trendsetters. They have changed basic standards, including people's perception of what the ticket should cost. Their stripped product, together with their ability to fill their airplanes and keep them airborne all the day, has enabled them to offer low prices. Their success has created new expectations among passengers. This has also highly affected the product of the traditional carriers and put them under strong pressures to be more cost-effective. During the initial part, the governments in the United States and Europe have had a different approach to the September 11 events. The US government chose to compensate its airline industry directly with large sums of money. The European Union has consequently refused to support airlines in the same way and asked them instead to reduce their capacity. And in my view, this has in reality led to unfair competition. Unfair competition initiated by the governments. That's quite a point. The market scene has changed both in Europe and the United States. In addition to the low-cost carriers breakthrough, the distribution of dominance between the traditional network carriers has changed. The scene is now dominated by less but bigger major players. Both in Europe and the United States, we have got a concentration in a few mega carriers. Many traditional carriers with high reputation have been obliged to end their operations or been absorbed by the bigger ones. The pattern of the intercontinental traffic is also changing. We have been used to consider London, Paris, and Frankfurt as major hubs for overseas traffic. In the traffic between East and West, traditional European trunk carriers are now meeting new competition from Emirates Airlines. Some of the Arabian countries have invested enormous sums of oil money to construct modern airports and build up high-quality carriers. This is threatening Europe's position in the intercontinental market. Today, some of those carriers are starting to operate inter-EU flights to the detriment of EU carriers and the code-share agreements with failing EU carriers. For instance, Air Malta Emirates code-share daily with Malta Larnaca. Let me then turn to the capacity crisis. In my view, the most urgent capacity problem in our part of the world is airspace limitations. European airspace is among the busiest of the world. In 2010, there were nearly 9 million commercial passenger flights and over 750 million passengers using EU airports per year. Capacity is already blown and leads to severe delays, which represent an airline cost between 1.3 to 1.9 billion euros per year, due to lack of airspace capacity, weather conditions, airport problems, and internal limitations. But there is more to come. We expect a growth up to 15 to 20 million movements in 2030. And my point is that European airspace capacity is not dimensioned for this. The strongest limiting navigation factor is the fragmentation of the airspace. And this takes place on different levels, between the states, between military and civil aviation, and between different geographical control areas. The difference between Europe and the United States in this area is so significant that we not only geographically can distinguish between two different worlds. In the United States, 20 control centrals are handling 18 million flights per year, coming from 503 airports. In Europe, we need as many as 66 control centrals to take care of 9 million flights per year, coming from 450 airports. At an equivalent cost in the United States of 400 euros per flight, as opposed to 800 euros per flight in Europe. That's really the difference. So then, to the economic crisis. We have been used to consider Europe as a leading world region. We colonized the rest of the world, and we still consider us, at least some of us consider us, the cradle of modern civilized society. Europe's present position is less flattering. I guess it looks like that from Australia as well. History does not entitle us to a dominant future world position. Today, Europe is far from the most dynamic part of the world. We must admit that the speed of innovation is far stronger in other parts of the world. And why is that? Because of lower regulation, less taxation, less emission trade scheme issues? I do not think this necessarily is the case. In my view, basic attitudes as less fear and higher optimism is far more important. We need basic reforms to be a leading world region, and this includes a brushing up our air transport system. Let us not forget that Europe is at its best in this area when removing artificial transportation boundaries, and the removal of transportation bottlenecks is an essential part of the modernization of Europe. So this is not all about air transport, it's about Europe. It has a wider perspective. Aviation has the potential of being a vital sector in society. It's a catalyst for economic growth and skill deployment. And aviation's economic and social contribution is substantial, generating around 220 billion euros per year. Now, how are our chances to realize the growth potential of civil aviation? Not the best for the time being, I'm afraid. Things are not working in favor of the air transport in Europe. Most governments seem to prefer railway to planes. But take one example. Consider this 3 kilometers of rail track takes you 3 kilometers to a single destination. But 3 kilometers runway gives you the whole world. That's a difference. In our global economy, this has got to be a force for good substantiability of our future. Most people seem to believe that airplanes are the worst CO2 polluters, even if the domestic air traffic only constitutes a few % of each country's CO2 emissions. One basic factor is far worse than it used to be 10 years ago. Oil prices have been jumping up, and this, of course, affects airlines all over the world, not only in Europe. In other parts of the world, air transport is recognized as a locomotive in the economic development. Many countries decided long ago to coordinate their industrial and political resources to win market shares. Especially Asian governments have for a long period seen the importance of supporting their national airlines in their efforts to get global routes. The state of Singapore has for a long been an illustrating example of this. In that country, strategically situated in the crossing between north-south and east-west, the government and their designated airline have worked closely together for decades to exploit the economic potential of civil aviation. From a home base growing from 2 to 5 million people and only one airport, Singapore Airlines has managed to become one of the world's leading airlines. And this is an example of how dominance in the air can integrate the little country in the world economy. The airlines in our part of the world are facing hard times. IATA has predicted a total loss of 700 billion Norwegian kroner in 2012 for the European airlines. High level of taxation and inefficient air traffic control systems represent serious downsides. These lessons have, of course, serial potential negative spin-offs for the rest of society. Fortunately, the airline industry picture is not black all over the world. In Europe, the financial crisis has affected a lot of countries, not only the Mediterranean nations, Greece, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, but also countries trading with them. There is a strong link between crisis management in these countries and the development of European air transport. In order to deal with this, we have to understand what the crisis really is. At least 3 of the hard-attacked countries have only a short democratic tradition. It may look like they have been running into overconsumption since they got their freedom. The new elected democratic politicians did not only want to give their citizens prosperity, they also wanted to give them welfare. Problem is that these welfare ambitions seem to have exceeded their economic potential. Historically, airlines represent no attractive investment, even if their profit potential is considerable. It is doubtful whether the total airline industry has been profitable during its total lifetime. Airlines have gone in red when the global growth of gross net product dips under 2%. Europe's regulators and politicians have been behaving as if it is business as usual in their approach to an industry that is severely weakened by 6 years of decline and a decade in which fuel prices have risen 5-fold. No account is taken of air transport's ability to help Europe's economic recovery. Industry is further weakened by a spate of swinging tax increases. ETS not only has brought us to the brink of the trade war, but if implemented, will result in significant traffic dilution over to the Middle East. It is an absolute gift to the Middle East carriers and to Boeing, which can expect it to gain from lost Airbus orders. Now, let me look at one sky with many clouds. In 2004, the European Community established the Single European Sky as a response to the challenges caused by the lack of airspace capacity. The overall goals of the Single European Sky were ambitious. By 2020, the program should increase safety by a factor of 10, increase capacity to become 3 times as high, reduce the cost of air traffic management by 50% per departure, and reduce the environmental burdens with 10%. The improvement potential of the Single European Sky is great. It has been stipulated that it will lead to 10 to 15 minutes reduced time consumption per flight. That is something we might need. And CO2 reductions amounting to 5 million tons carbon dioxide per year. Together with this, we are to have improved punctuality and reduced complexity. The Single European Sky consists of new technological applications and new legislation. The technological improvements are to take place both on ground and airborne, and it's imperative that the different systems fit together so they can speak with each other. CESAR is the technological and operational dimension of the Single European Sky. It is bringing in industrial development and deployment. CESAR deployment is estimated to require total investments in excess of 30 billion euros to deliver significant benefits in terms of costs and operational improvements. The realization of these benefits does require carefully orchestrated implementation and strict adherence of timelines by all players. It has to be a strong link between investment plans and performance targets. 30 billion euros is an enormous investment. It's imperative that the investments are cost-effective. In order to achieve this, we have to be certain that the operational criteria are relevant according to the overall program. If not, we will be running the risk of overinvestment in details with limited operational improvements. Neither overinvestment nor lack of relevant investments is desirable. It's also vital that industry investments really should lead to technological solutions. It would be a waste of money to spend development resources to finance the use of shelfware technology based on traditional systems. On the other hand, the winning potential of this program is great. The deployment of CESAR will create an additional 419 billion euro gross direct product from 2013 to 2030. CESAR will directly and indirectly create an additional 328,000 jobs in the air transport industry. Passenger experience will be improved and fewer cancellations and delays will be the experience. At the same time, the United States is pursuing a similar program, the Next Generation Air Transport System, the Next Gen. This is to lead up to a new national airspace system across the states between 2012 and 2025. My point is that the coordination between the Single European Sky and Next Gen is essential, especially concerning operational standardization, which is essential to ensure that the combined cost is kept low. Unfortunately, we are still far from reaching the Single European Sky's goals. At the end of 2011, we got the Performance Review Body's assessment report for the performance plans for the reference period 1. That is the one from 2012 to 2014. And this shows that the targeted performance improvements do not yet go far enough. Costs are still too high. The cost of ATM over the next 3 years is likely to be 2% of target. And a reduction of 12.5% per year would be required in ATM costs if the community is to meet the strategic target of halving the unit rates by 2020. And this seems, however, to be room for lowering the support costs by better coordination within the 29 countries. The Single European Sky Regulation requires all EU members to be a part of a functional airspace bloc by the year of 2012, the so-called FAB. A FAB means an airspace bloc based on operational requirements across state boundaries. The function of air navigation service providers is intended to be performance-driven and optimized as a result of enhanced cooperation among the ANSPs. And so far, as you know, 9 FABs have been declared. There seems to be little doubt that the 9 FABs will be operating by the end of this year. It is, in my view, more doubtful whether they will come to represent the expected progress on the road to the Single European Sky. The character of improvement differs between the 9 different FABs, revealing the lack of a sufficiently coordinated common effort. The FABs have to be more than a summing up of the national plans. They should represent an added value in terms of a common procurement and coordinated investments. So far, they appear to be too heterogeneous, and furthermore, there seems to be a lack of consequences for not meeting common targets. The need for a modernization of airspace is self-evident. Still, the aviation industry alone cannot afford to fund such an extensive modernization program while struggling with the effects of the current recession. The airline industry has already made significant progress in cutting their internal costs. However, soaring external costs such as fuel and taxation continue to hamper industry profitability. So, in this situation, public funding is essential to maintain the CESAR timelines. In particular, the use of the 10T funds in line with the proposed Connecting Europe facility budget is important. Europe needs the Single European Sky to become a success. In spite of this need, we are facing serious threats against the modernization of the European airspace. Changes of habits are necessary to overcome the present obstacles. We cannot continue going on the same way. But the willingness to change habit is not obvious, especially when it comes to cutting costs. And here we are dealing with two different cultural traditions. Some stakeholder groups have been obliged to cutting costs in order to survive. Others have a tradition in explaining politicians why their costs necessarily have to be that high. And activities with the market monopoly have systematically passed increased costs over to the consumer in terms of increased prices instead of turning around their business. This is contrary to the general tendency to make public services subject to competition. No one should accept that air traffic controllers in any country should be able to paralyze air traffic anytime their employer should make a decision they disagree with. Up till now, they have been able to do so in some countries because there has been no alternative to the present organization of their services. But by doing so, they have avoided the heavy part of the adjustments. Today, the time is out for such behavior. The consumers do not accept it, and neither should we. The merger of national sectors and the use of new technology and open tenders represent the path to improved quality in the air navigation services. Experience so far has convinced me that strong binding common decisions are necessary to realize the Single European Sky targets. This means that the direction of the Single European Sky has to be a top-down process. The Commission cannot be left alone to jockey between conflicting national interests. The change has to be imperative and come from a top political level. Some states prefer to pursue their own national interests rather than complying with European common goals. That is a certain way to the preservation of airspace fragmentation, and we cannot afford that. It is lack of political will and not technical obstacles that is delaying the required progress. A new kind of leadership is required to realize the improvement potential of air navigation. We need effective managers able to create a strong common commitment between all the variety of interests in the air transport community. Leaders who pursue alliances and rule by dividing the different interests are insufficient for our purpose. Such leaders are out. Leaders who think and act to unite, they are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for for a few questions. I think there's a number of very interesting comments made in that, some of them quite controversial, as a matter of fact. And we have people with microphones, I believe. So has anyone got any questions? Let me start. Thank you very much for that. If I summarised your presentation into one sentence, it was not that we're living in turbulent times, but that we're living in decisionless times, that there's a need for clarity and decision making. Who is going to do that? Who should we be pointing the finger at? Whose chest should we be bashing to say, make some intelligent decisions?
I think there is a strong need for political decisions. And to take one example, when the different countries' representatives meet in the Single European Sky Committee, Single Sky Committee, they are instructed by their experts in the ministry to protect their national interests. That's the success criteria. We should create different success criteria, rewarding political actions that are more unifying. So we have to do something with the political context, and we have to elect politicians that are more in favor of seeing whole Europe instead of defending segmented interests.
I don't disagree with that, but of course you then run into the problem That's exactly what they didn't do in Singapore, isn't it? Singapore, the great success story, they defended Singapore's interest. They put down a very clear marker that they were going to only to look at Singapore. So, whereas you're saying we need to defend Europe as a single country, if you like, or as a single region, or as a single unit.
This has to do with how you use your political potential. My point is that we have a political potential in Europe, but they're not using it. In Singapore, they used it, and that's their benefit.
Right. They have. I mean, Singapore's a very clear example where there was an integrated aviation policy where they opened for free trade. They built a very fine airport. They spent quite a lot of money developing a very good airline. A number of those things are illegal in Europe. Funnily enough, I mean, you can't use state money to build airports. We've got massive trade issues. Just speak to Lufthansa about whether or not they believe in free trade. Sorry, Germany, did I say Lufthansa? Terrible mistake. We've got a lot of... The issues are quite complex, aren't they? The Emirates, again, I mean, everyone talks about the nasty Emirates carriers. I just disagree with that altogether, that what they are is extraordinarily good carriers who happen to have very fine equipment, game-changing equipment, as a matter of fact, and very fine airports. Now, as it happens, they've got terrible airspace issues, so it's not as good as it seems. But the issues, any sort of European policy is going to need to consider infrastructure and airlines and competition. They're very complicated. They're complicated topics to talk about, aren't they?
Absolutely. But we have to use our possibilities when we still can. And the single European sky is not illegal yet. So we have to use our possibilities while they are open to us, when the options are open. And of course, the European scene is quite different from the Asian one, and from the Australian one as well. But we have to use our opportunities when they are open. If not, they will be closed. And we cannot afford that the single European sky window should be closed.
No.
We have to keep it open, and we have to use the potential. So time is now to use that.
Well, absolutely. I don't disagree with that for a moment. Can we talk for a moment about competition? One of the things that I'm really fascinated by is how do we get more competition into the provision of air navigation services? I think 10 years ago, most of the people in this room would have said that airports were natural monopolies and you couldn't get competition in the airport sector, and there was no point trying. 10 years later, I think there's probably only 1% of the people in this room would still think that, and they're going to be reprogrammed later. But that person will be reprogrammed later. And now we're at a point where everyone says, oh, air traffic control, that's a natural monopoly, that can't have competition. Do you agree with that?
Well, what I think we should do is to get inspired by the English way of solving this. In 2001, they opened up for a tender and they created a private-public partnership. And they changed nets. And according to my knowledge, there has been no industrial actions for 40 years in England. And the way it is organized, they are not able to pass exceeding costs over to the consumer because there's a cap of money limited in that system. So I think the English example, it's a very interesting one, and I think there's a lot to learn from the English experience in Norway. Of course, you never have any guarantee that you will have against the industrial actions, but if you are not able to exceed the costs, and if you have a certain amount of money within which you have to maneuver, then there will be quite reduced risk that we should have such actions, which unfortunately had in Norway. So the system has to be changed. I think we have to start there.
But it's one thing to make every ANSP in Europe look like gnats from an ownership perspective. The issue is surely, and Martin's sitting directly in the front row, I was going to point out they are one of the most expensive ANSPs in all of Europe. Yeah, it is the elephant in the room, isn't it? But the issue is not necessarily... I don't think ownership's the issue, or I don't think ownership structure is the issue. My question is more, can you imagine a place where ANSPs compete for business? Or do you think that the sort of national boundaries are always going to be there?
The point is that we have to open up for alternative, because what characterizes the monopoly situation is that you have got no alternative. So how we do this, that's not my point, but the fact that we should do it is my point. There are many places in the world we could look to. We could look to Canada, we could look to New Zealand. They have interesting pieces of experience. So let us create a system that can give us some alternatives. I think we have to start there, and I'm open for several ways in which to do it.
Yeah, right. I've monopolised the conversation. Let's open the questioning up to competition. Does anyone have a question? As it happens, we're about exactly on time, aren't we? So, thank you very much for that. I think it was very, very helpful, and I'm sure you'll join with me in thanking Kara. Thank you.
So thank you. That was the first session, and we are already heading into the first coffee break. So I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. There's one thing I forgot to say, and that is, if any in the audience or the speaker will give the address to the webcast, tell them to go in via our website, avinor.no, and then they can watch you. Thank you.